Last night, she abruptly resigned as the host of the show. And to say that I'm quite sad about it is an understatement.
That was Stephen A. Smith completely blindsided by his co-host's sudden departure. Molly Qerim had been the face of First Take for over a decade, but something went seriously wrong behind the scenes. Now she's signed a massive new deal outside ESPN, and the network's owners are furious. So what really happened? Let's break it down. The shocking exit that left everyone speechless. What started as just another Monday at ESPN's Bristol headquarters quickly spiraled into one of the most dramatic departures in sports media history, when Molly Qerim walked out of the First Take studio on September 15th, 2025. Nobody, not even her longtime co-host Stephen A. Smith, saw what was coming next. But what happened over the following 48 hours would send shockwaves through the entire sports broadcasting industry and expose the ugly truth about how ESPN really treats its talent. Picture this, it's Monday, September 15th, and Molly Qerim is doing what she's done for the past decade, expertly moderating the heated debates between Stephen A. Smith and the rotating cast of analysts on First Take. She's in her element, keeping the show flowing with that signature poise and professionalism that made her indispensable to ESPN's flagship morning program. The cameras roll, the debates rage, and everything seems perfectly normal. But behind those composed eyes and that warm smile, a storm was brewing that would change everything. After the show wrapped, Molly packed up her things and walked out of that studio for what would be the very last time. She headed home, probably thinking about the contract negotiations that had been dragging on for months, the lowball offers, and the increasingly frustrating conversations with ESPN executives who seemed to value everyone except the woman who had helped transform First Take into a ratings juggernaut. Little did she know that by the time she woke up the next morning, her entire world would be turned upside down, because that very night while Molly was sleeping, Sports Business Journal's Austin Karp dropped a bombshell report that would change everything. The headline read, "Sources, Molly Qerim leaving ESPN, First Take." Suddenly, what was supposed to be a private negotiation between Qerim and ESPN became front-page news across the sports media landscape. The report detailed how Qerim had turned down ESPN's renewal offer due to misaligned visions for her future, emphasizing her desire to turn the page after 10 years moderating alongside Stephen A. Smith. But here's where it gets interesting. The report suggested she would be leaving at the end of the year, giving ESPN and her fans time to process this massive change. That's not what happened. Instead, when Molly woke up on Tuesday morning and saw that her private business had been splashed across every sports website in America, she made a decision that would leave ESPN scrambling and Stephen A. Smith looking completely blindsided on live television. Rather than showing up to work as scheduled, Molly took to Instagram and dropped her own bombshell. At exactly 9 a.m. Eastern Time, she posted to her Instagram story, "It is with a heavy heart that I share. I'll be leaving ESPN and First Take effective immediately. Grateful doesn't begin to cover my 10 incredible years here. This show changed my life. To the fans, thank you for the love. To my team, your family. Excited for what's next. Effective immediately, not at the end of the year as the leaked report suggested. Not after a farewell tour or a proper goodbye. Immediately." And just like that, one of the most professional and composed figures in sports media had essentially said, "I'm done," and walked away from a multi-million-dollar contract. The post was viewed over 500,000 times in the first hour, and social media absolutely exploded. Molly Qerim started trending nationwide, and suddenly everyone wanted to know what the hell had just happened at ESPN. How does someone go from hosting a show on Monday to being completely done on Tuesday? But the real shock came a few hours later when First Take went live. There was Stephen A. Smith sitting alone at that familiar desk, looking visibly shaken as he delivered the news that would leave viewers stunned. The word abruptly hit like a freight train. This wasn't a planned departure. This wasn't a mutual parting of ways. This was Molly Qerim essentially rage quitting one of the most coveted hosting gigs in sports media, and nobody saw it coming. Stephen A.'s words were careful, measured, but you could see the frustration and confusion in his eyes. Here was a man who had worked alongside Molly for a decade, and even he seemed caught off guard by the timing and the manner of her exit. ESPN executives, who were also reportedly blindsided by the premature disclosure, scrambled internally as they had hoped to control the narrative closer to December. What made this even more dramatic was the timing. We're talking about the middle of football season, when First Take's ratings are at their peak, when sports debates are most heated, and when ESPN needs their A-team on the field. Instead, they found themselves with a gaping hole in their flagship show and no immediate plan to fill it. The ratings for that first episode without Molly actually surged 15% year over year to 750,000 viewers, but it was clearly driven by drama and curiosity rather than the show's actual content. People weren't tuning in to hear Stephen A's takes on the NFL. They were tuning in to see what the hell was happening at ESPN. And the social media reaction? Absolutely nuclear. Within hours, Molly Qerim had generated 2.5 million impressions, with 60% of posts expressing shock at the abrupt phrasing. Fans were demanding answers, and ESPN wasn't giving them any. But here's what makes this story even more fascinating. This wasn't just about one person leaving a job. This was about what had been building behind the scenes for months, maybe even years. Contract negotiations had actually started way back in January 2025, with Qerim's existing deal set to expire at the end of the year. What should have been routine renewal talks had devolved into something much uglier. See, Molly wasn't just any host. She was the woman who had taken First Take from a niche debate show to ESPN's highest-rated morning program, averaging over 600,000 daily viewers. Under her moderation, viewership had surged 45% from 2015 to 2024, with the show generating over $100 million in yearly ad revenue. She wasn't just the moderator, she was a key driver of the show's success. But despite all of this success, despite being Emmy-nominated, despite being the steady hand that kept Stephen A. Smith's bombast in check, ESPN's offer was insulting. We're talking about a woman who was making an estimated $500,000 annually, while her co-host Stephen A. Smith was pulling down $20 million. That's a 40-to-1 ratio. Let that sink in for a moment. ESPN's final proposal was a 4-year deal at $700,000 to $850,000 base salary, escalating 5% annually plus $200,000. For someone else, that might sound like good money, but for the co-host of ESPN's flagship show, for someone who had boosted female viewership by 30%, it was a slap in the face. And it wasn't just about the money. ESPN wanted Molly to be versatile, requiring 20% of her time on non-First Take ventures like ESPN Plus documentaries or women's sports panels. They wanted to dilute her star power, spread her thin across multiple projects while keeping her salary artificially low. Sources described the offer as disrespectful, not just for the dollar amount, but for implying she was interchangeable in the show's ecosystem. But the real kicker, while ESPN was lowballing Molly, they were simultaneously announcing massive extensions for other talent. The same day her exit became public, ESPN announced a massive multi-year extension for rising NBA reporter Malika Andrews, fueling speculation that they had been planning for Molly's departure all along. So when that Sports Business Journal report leaked her contract situation to the world, it was the final straw. Molly had been dealing with months of frustrating negotiations, lowball offers, and what seemed like a systematic effort to undervalue her contributions. The leak made everything public, embarrassing, and impossible to walk back.
She, Molly, put out a statement because there was a report on it, so it kind of got out of our respective controls once that happened.
That's ESPN president of content Burke Magnus explaining what happened, and you can hear the damage control in his voice. He later told The Athletic that the Sports Business Journal report on Monday forced our hand. Negotiations weren't totally aligned on roles beyond First Take, but we wanted Molly to stay in some capacity. She chose a clean break, and with the story out, it made sense to act now rather than drag it out. A clean break. That's corporate speak for we messed this up badly and now we're trying to salvage what we can. The truth is, ESPN never expected Molly to walk away so decisively. They thought they could lowball her, string her along, and eventually force her to accept their terms. They were wrong. The power play that exposed ESPN's toxic culture. Now, if you thought Molly Qerim's abrupt exit was just about money, you'd be missing the bigger picture, because what happened next would expose the real power dynamics at ESPN and reveal just how toxic the environment had become behind the scenes. Enter Marcellus Wiley, former ESPN host and current podcast powerhouse, who dropped a theory so explosive that it sent shockwaves through the entire sports media industry. Just 5 days after Molly's dramatic exit, Marcellus Wiley released a YouTube podcast that would accumulate 1.3 million views and completely reframe how people understood what had really happened at ESPN. His theory, Molly Qerim didn't just quit. She executed one of the most brilliant power plays in television history, but Wiley's theory went deeper than just exposing Stephen A's dependence on Molly. He was alleging that she felt boxed out by Smith's massive influence at the network and had decided to make a statement that would be impossible to ignore.
I'm talking about Stephen A. Smith as well, because remember, he's an executive producer on that show, and as he will always remind you, that's his show.
This is where the story gets really interesting, because it reveals the complex power structure that had developed at ESPN around Stephen A. Smith. We're not just talking about a co-host relationship. We're talking about a situation where one person had accumulated so much influence that they essentially controlled the fate of everyone around them. Stephen A. Smith's current deal with ESPN is worth $15 million over 5 years, plus an additional $12 million from SiriusXM, totaling around $40 million yearly. But with that kind of money comes an extraordinary level of influence. Smith isn't just the talent, he's an executive producer, which means he has a say in who gets hired, who gets fired, and how much everyone else gets paid. Wiley was referencing the well-known fact that Stephen A. had helped negotiate better deals for people like Kendrick Perkins, Dan Orlovsky, and Ryan Clark. But here's the flip side of that power. If Stephen A. doesn't advocate for you, you're stuck. And according to Wiley's theory, that's exactly what happened to Molly. The implications of this are staggering. If Wiley is right, then Molly wasn't just negotiating with ESPN executives, she was essentially having to get approval from her co-host for any significant career advancement. Imagine being in that position. You've helped build a show into a massive success, but your future depends on whether the person sitting next to you decides you deserve it. And there's evidence to support this theory. Look at what happened to other first-take personalities over the years. Max Kellerman, who was pushed out in 2023, never had the same kind of relationship with Stephen A. that others enjoyed. Shannon Sharpe, who left for Fox Sports 1, had his own issues with the ESPN power structure. It's a pattern that suggests the network has allowed one person to accumulate too much control. But the most damning piece of evidence in Wiley's theory? The timing of Molly's exit and what it revealed about the relationship between her and Stephen A.
Perkins just talked about that recently, about how Stephen A. Smith has that pull. Stephen A. Smith even talked about that when he checked Cam Newton recently, talking about, hey, I've hooked a lot of guys up with money around here.
This is a crucial observation. When someone leaves a show after a decade, especially when they've had a good relationship with their co-host, you expect some acknowledgement. You expect a thank you to the people you've worked with. Molly's Instagram post thanked the fans and called her team family, but there was no mention of Stephen A. Smith by name. For two people who had supposedly been partners for 10 years, that silence was deafening, and the awkwardness wasn't just one-sided. Look at how Stephen A. handled the announcement on air. While he was professional and said nice things about Molly, there was something stilted about his delivery, something that suggested this wasn't the amicable parting he was trying to portray. None of y'all business. Those aren't the words of someone who's sad to see a close friend and colleague leave. Those are the words of someone who's defensive, someone who knows there's more to the story but doesn't want to get into it. The truth is, according to multiple sources, the relationship between Molly and Stephen A. had been deteriorating for some time. We're talking about production logs that showed Smith averaging 60 to 65% of speaking time per episode, with Qerim getting only 15 to 20%. Her role had essentially been reduced to that of a traffic cop, managing Smith's monologue. A 2024 episode where Smith jokingly cut her off mid-sentence, "Molly, I'm talking here," went viral, generating 500,000 views on social media and sparking the Let Molly Speak hashtag. It was supposed to be playful banter, but fans saw it differently. They saw a woman being dismissed and marginalized on her own show. But the problems went beyond just airtime. Insiders reported that Smith wielded outsized influence over segment choices and guest bookings, often bypassing Qerim's input entirely. She wanted to shape the show's narrative, not just referee it, but Smith's influence meant his vision dominated every aspect of the production. And then there were the personal comments. Smith's on-air remarks about Qerim's eating habits, her personal life, even references to her 2021 divorce from former NBA player Jalen Rose, comments that some fans saw as playful but others viewed as inappropriate and unprofessional. A source close to Qerim noted that she privately expressed discomfort with these remarks, feeling they undermined her authority. All of this was building to a breaking point, and according to Wiley's theory, the leaked contract report was simply the catalyst that allowed Molly to execute her master plan. By leaving immediately and leaving Stephen A. to handle the show alone, she was making a statement that couldn't be ignored. First Take needed her more than she needed First Take.
The details, quite frankly, are none of y'all business, but it's not as if I know all the details. It was a contract negotiation that was going on.
The multi-million-dollar bidding war that changes everything. Just when you thought the Molly Qerim story couldn't get any more dramatic, the sports media world exploded with news that would change everything we thought we knew about her departure from ESPN. Because while ESPN executives were scrambling to explain away her abrupt exit and Stephen A. Smith was trying to maintain damage control. Something extraordinary was happening behind the scenes. A full-scale bidding war for Molly's services that would expose just how badly ESPN had undervalued one of their most important assets. The first bombshell dropped just 4 days after Molly's exit, and it came from an unexpected source. The United States Sun reported that Fox Sports had tabbed a blockbuster offer that would make ESPN's lowball proposal look absolutely insulting. We're talking about a 3-year deal with $2 million annually in base salary, with bonuses that could push her total compensation to $2.5 to $3 million per year. Let me put that in perspective for you. ESPN had offered Molly a maximum of $850,000 annually in their final proposal. Fox Sports was offering her more than double that amount as a starting point. For someone who had been making approximately $500,000 at ESPN, this represented a potential 400 to 500% increase in earnings. It was the kind of offer that doesn't just change your financial situation, it completely transforms your entire career trajectory.
She's like, why am I sitting in a situation that I know won't get better? Think about it. You too. Beat it up in the comments. Tell me your thoughts about it. But when you know you need to do something and you know it's best for you, what you waiting for? I think Molly woke up that morning, Tuesday morning, and said, what am I waiting for?
But the Fox Sports offer wasn't just about money. The package positioned Qerim as a multi-sport anchor, covering NFL studio shows, college football previews, NCAA basketball segments, and hosting her own branded podcast. Most importantly, it gave her something ESPN had refused to provide: lead host status with creative control and veto power over co-panelists. Think about what this means. At ESPN, Molly had been relegated to playing traffic cop for Stephen A. Smith's monologues, getting 15–20% of the speaking time. Despite being an equally important part of the show's success, Fox was offering her the chance to be the undisputed star of her own programs, with the authority to shape content and control the direction of conversations. The performance bonuses in the Fox deal were particularly interesting, up to $500,000 tied to viewership targets, specifically for outpacing ESPN's First Take in key demographics like the 1849 age group and female viewers. Fox wasn't just hiring Molly, they were positioning her as a direct weapon against ESPN's morning dominance. But Fox Sports wasn't the only network that had taken notice of ESPN's massive blunder. Reports began surfacing of interest from Amazon Prime Video, with sources suggesting a potential NFL-focused debate show valued at $1.8 million annually. NBC Sports was also reportedly in the mix, eyeing her for Football Night in America or a rebooted college football studio show, with estimates ranging from $1.5 to $2 million for a 2-year term. What's remarkable about this bidding war is what it revealed about Molly's true market value. For years, ESPN had been treating her as a replaceable moderator, someone whose primary job was to facilitate debates between the real stars of the show. But the immediate and intense interest from major networks told a completely different story. These weren't charity offers or courtesy meetings. These were serious big money attempts to acquire someone the industry recognized as a legitimate star. The timing of these offers also reveals something crucial about how the industry viewed ESPN's handling of the situation. Within hours of Molly's Instagram announcement, talent agents and network executives were making calls, recognizing that ESPN had just made one of the biggest personnel mistakes in recent sports media history.
How did he know so much about Shannon's situation? And as soon as Shannon went through that fire, he was the first one on air saying, come on, man, and talking on both sides because of the bosses, because he was in that meeting.
But perhaps the most telling aspect of this entire situation was how ESPN reacted to the news of Molly's lucrative options. Rather than acknowledging their mistake or attempting to make a competitive counteroffer, they doubled down on their narrative that this was a mutual evolution and that they had always respected her decision to leave. Burke Magnus told The Athletic, "Our discussions with Molly evolved, and we respect her decision for new horizons. The tryouts ensure First Take stays dynamic. That's corporate speak for we're gonna pretend this was always the plan, even though we clearly miscalculated her value." The contrast couldn't be more stark. While ESPN was conducting tryouts to replace someone they had apparently considered easily replaceable, other networks were offering that same person multi-million-dollar deals and creative control over major programming. It was a level of professional embarrassment that you rarely see in the corporate world. And the embarrassment was compounded by what happened to First Take's performance in Molly's absence. While ratings initially held steady due to curiosity about the drama, the show began showing signs of strain without her stabilizing presence. Episodes with interim hosts like Ryan Clark saw Smith dialing back his intensity, 10% fewer interruptions according to production logs, suggesting an awareness of how much he had relied on Molly's ability to manage his more explosive tendencies. Fan reactions on social media were telling. Posts like First Take Fan with 1,500 likes reading show feels off without Molly's flow, and polls showing that 70% of viewers supported Qerim's move while questioning whether the show could maintain its quality without her. But beyond the immediate offers and the corporate maneuvering, Molly's situation highlighted some uncomfortable truths about the sports media industry, particularly regarding how female talent is valued and compensated. The 2025 Sports Media Watch report, noting that women hosts earn 35% less than men in debate formats, wasn't just a statistic, it was Molly's lived reality. Consider the math. Stephen A. Smith earns approximately $20 million annually from ESPN alone. If Molly were to receive even 10% of that amount, a reasonable ask for the co-host of a show that generates over $100 million in annual advertising revenue, she would be earning $2 million per year. Instead, ESPN offered her $850,000 maximum and expected her to be grateful for the opportunity. The Fox Sports offer validated what many industry observers had long suspected. Molly Qerim had been dramatically undervalued at ESPN, not because she lacked talent or drawing power, but because the network had fallen into the trap of assuming that moderators are less valuable than the personalities they moderate. It's an assumption that the bidding war proved to be catastrophically wrong. What makes this story even more fascinating is the strategic implications for Fox Sports. By offering Molly a deal that positions her as the face of their sports programming, they're not just acquiring talent, they're making a direct assault on ESPN's morning dominance. They're betting that viewers who appreciated Molly's style at ESPN will follow her to a new network, potentially taking a significant chunk of First Take's audience with them. And there's precedent for this strategy working. When Shannon Sharpe left ESPN for Fox Sports 1's Undisputed, he brought credibility and audience with him. When Skip Bayless moved from ESPN to Fox Sports, he demonstrated that personalities could successfully transition between networks. Molly's situation is different because she's not just moving, she's being positioned as the star rather than the supporting player. The report suggests that Molly is deliberately taking her time with the decision, waiting until late October to maximize leverage and potentially create even more competitive offers. It's a smart strategy that reflects someone who has learned from watching how the sports media industry operates and is determined not to undervalue herself again. Thanks for watching. If you had a good time, keep the adventure alive by clicking on one of the suggested videos on your screen right now for more amazing content.